I'm Mark Ellingham. I set up Rough Guides 25 years ago and took it through various incarnations, doing travel books, books about culture, popular culture, eventually doing a book about climate change, which seemed in some ways at odds with the whole Rough Guide concept of travel. It actually led me to set up a special new green imprint for a company called Profile Books. Along the way I met Frank Field and started working with him on Cool Earth. Each year the destruction of rainforests accounts for more CO2 being released into the atmosphere than the entire emissions of the USA. So it's very much the front line of action that we can take against climate change. And protecting, even as an individual, protecting an acre of rainforest, you can lock in 260 tonnes of CO2. So finding a way that individuals can do that is an incredibly important contribution. The best kind of sort of offsetting that any of us can do individually, the best thing that schools can do, communities can do. The charity Cool Earth that Frank Field set up with Johan Eliesch enables individuals to sponsor rainforests, which gets bought on their behalf and then gets put into a local trust, so that it's never actually sort of owned outside the community. It gets returned to the community. And then we put in more money, which helps local people have sustainable employment. For example, in Brazil, we've turned a logging plant into a Brazil nut processing plant, which increases the value of the Brazil nuts when they get exported, because they're further down the road, they can be sold for more. We allow free access to the forest for local people to do rubber tapping, working with the Rubber Tappers Union in Brazil. So there's lots of sort of community involvement, and the forest standing for the local people is worth a lot more than if it's logged and they temporarily get jobs, or some of them temporarily get jobs, but often it's just a group of loggers who come in. It doesn't help, even at that stage, the local community. Since leaving Rough Guides, I've set up a green environmental list for Profile Books, and the first book that we published, and I think the most important book we will ever publish, is a book called Fixing Climate. This is by Wally Broecker, who's one of the world's foremost climate scientists. He's actually the man who coined the term global warming. He feels that the world has woken up too late to climate change and to CO2 emissions. We're not going to change fast enough. We need to look at technology to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. He's been working with an incredibly interesting, inspired scientist at Columbia University called Klaus Lackner, who has developed what he calls a carbon scrubber, or an artificial tree. This is in pre-prototype stage at the moment, but it has a kind of plastic that reacts with the CO2. The scrubber then goes into a vacuum, water vapour washes off or dislodges the CO2 molecules, and then the CO2 is condensed and liquefied and can be stored. This is technology very much in its infancy, but the interesting thing about it is you can do it anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter. CO2 spreads incredibly quickly. The air that we breathe, the CO2 that we breathe out will be, as far as Iceland by 2 or 3 days' time. So it doesn't matter where you remove the CO2, the net effect is the same. Obviously, you want to have these carbon scrubbers at a point where you can very easily store the carbon, the resultant liquefied CO2, and you also want to do it where you can get very easy, cheap energy. What Frank Field has called upon the government to do is to put money into investing in atmospheric carbon capture, these carbon scrubber technology, and he's very cleverly linked it in the early day motion that he's just put to the expansion of airports. Now, the one thing about aviation possibly accounts for as much as 18% of Britain's carbon footprint at the moment. The figures are being bandied around, and if you use a multiplier of 1.9 because of where the CO2 is released by aviation, and if you account for the other greenhouse gases that aviation causes, apparently 18.5% of Britain's emissions is the current percentage. This is growing with the expansion of Heathrow. It's going to be unfeasible for Britain to meet its commitment to reducing its CO2 emissions by 80% by 2050. So the only possible solution on aviation is to remove the CO2. French early day motion calls for every gram of CO2 that airports emit to be removed. And I think if the political will is there, this is a feasible scientific, technological possibility. It would also do something wonderful as far as I'm concerned, which is to reduce people's guilt about flying. I think it's holidays and travel are an important part of all of our lives. We don't want to feel guilty about it, but we don't want to feel that we are destroying our own planet for future generations. So I think it's in all our interests to move very quickly on this and to get atmospheric carbon capture technology in place.